The moment my son-in-law opened the door and looked past me, like I was somebody who had knocked on the wrong house, I felt something cold move through me that I hadn't felt before. Not anger, not grief. Something quieter than both of those things. Something that had been waiting a long time to be noticed. It was the second Saturday of October, and the sweet gums along Maple Crest Drive had just started turning, that particular shade of amber that reminds you autumn in Tennessee doesn't apologize for being beautiful. I had driven the 23 minutes from Maryville with a German chocolate cake in the back seat, still warm from the oven. It was my grandson Connor's 8th birthday. I had made the same cake for every birthday of his life. My son-in-law Grant stood in the doorway in a collared shirt, the kind you wear when you want to look relaxed but still important. Behind him, the house was bright and full of voices I didn't recognize. Laughter that didn't belong to any family I knew. "We're keeping it small today," he said. "Not sorry, not explaining, informing. Just some people from the firm. Lauren should have called you." I looked past his shoulder, searching for my daughter. She was standing near the kitchen island with a glass of wine, talking to a woman in a blazer. She saw me. I know she saw me. She looked down at her glass. "Connor invited me himself," I said. "He called me Thursday. He asked me to bring the German chocolate." Grant's expression didn't change, exactly, but something behind it tightened. "He's 8. He doesn't manage the guest list." He glanced at the cake carrier in my hands. "You're welcome to leave that, if you'd like." If you'd like, as though I had offered it. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that the woman in the blazer glanced over. Long enough for me to understand that whatever I said next would be remembered by someone other than just him, so I said nothing. I handed him the cake. I turned around and walked back to my car. I did not look back at the house. I already knew my daughter wasn't coming to the door. The drive back to Maryville felt longer than 23 minutes. I took the slower road, the one that runs alongside the river, because I needed time to breathe without arriving anywhere. The radio was off. The window was cracked. The air smelled like wood smoke, and something faintly sweet, fallen apples maybe, or the last of the summer grass burning somewhere nearby. My husband Robert used to say that Tennessee in October smells like the world is letting go gracefully. He died 7 years ago, a Tuesday in November, quietly, in the hospital bed we had moved into the living room so he could see the yard. I still sleep on my side of the mattress. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the numbness had shifted into something harder. I set my keys on the hook by the back door, poured a glass of water I didn't drink, and stood at the kitchen window, looking at the yard Robert had planted before he got sick. Then I went to the closet in the spare bedroom where I keep the files. I don't know exactly when I started keeping them. Sometime during the 2nd year, I think, when the transfers became automatic, and I told myself that was just easier for everyone. I had labeled the folder simply, Lauren and Grant. Household. It was practical. I am a practical woman. I spent 31 years as a registered nurse in the cardiac unit at UT Medical Center, and nurses learn early that the world does not stop for feelings. You document, you track, you prepare. I carried the folder to the kitchen table and turned on the overhead light. It took me 2.5 hours to go through everything. The mortgage assistance, monthly top-up because the house on Maple Crest Drive was more than they could qualify for a loan. The lease payments on Grant's BMW and my daughter's Lexus SUV. Connor's tuition at Hillside Academy, the private school where he wore a blazer and tie every day, and where I had never once been called a grandparent at a school event. The fees for his travel soccer league, 3 summers of overnight camps, the family vacation to Hilton Head that I funded in full and was not invited to because, as my daughter had explained, it was already a lot of people. The startup costs for Grant's consulting business, a business that had never, in 4 years, turned a profit. My daughter's clothing subscriptions, their housekeeping service, which came twice a week, the pool maintenance contract for the pool in the backyard of a house, where I had never once been offered a swim. I counted each line item carefully, the way I had counted medication dosages for 31 years. 76 separate monthly commitments, 6 years of them, some months more than others. The total, when I added it all, was $247,000. Not from a salary, I was retired, from Robert's life insurance, from the savings account I had built over decades on a nurse's wages, from the investment account I had planned to use for the years I had left. I sat in my kitchen in the quiet and I looked at my hands. The linoleum floor under my chair had been peeling at the corner near the refrigerator for 4 years. I had been meaning to fix it. The kitchen faucet had a slow drip that I had learned to stop hearing. I was wearing Robert's old gray cardigan, the one with the small moth hole at the elbow, because last winter I had looked at a new sweater at the department store and thought, not this month, not this month, for 6 years. Grant had stood in his doorway in his collared shirt, in the house I helped pay for, and looked past me like I was nobody. My hands stopped trembling. They went still with something cleaner than anger. I closed the folder. In the morning, everything would change. The next day was Sunday. I dressed carefully in my navy slacks and the cream blouse I wore to church on important Sundays. I drove to First Tennessee Bank on Broadway before the Sunday crowds filled the parking lots. Joan, the branch manager, had known me for 11 years. Silver-streaked hair, always wore a silk scarf at her collar. She saw me come through the door and waved me toward her office without making me wait. I set the folder on her desk and folded my hands in my lap. I need to cancel all automatic transfers to my daughter and son-in-law's accounts, I said. All of them, effective today. Joan looked at the folder. She knew better than to ask a woman in a cream blouse on a Sunday morning if she was sure. She pulled it toward her and began reviewing the pages. Then she paused. I need to show you something. She turned the monitor slightly. We received a cosigner application last Tuesday, a commercial real estate loan, $180,000. She looked at me over her glasses. Your name is listed as the cosigner. It was flagged because the signature on the application didn't match your signature on file. The room felt very still. I didn't sign anything, I said. We know. The application was frozen, but I want you to be clear about what this means. Someone submitted this with your name and a forged signature. I thought about the folder in my lap. I thought about Grant's consulting business, 4 years old and never profitable. I thought about the BMW in the driveway and the pool maintenance contract. Who submitted it? I asked. Joan said the name of my son-in-law. I exhaled slowly. Lock everything, I said. Fraud alert on every account. Remove all secondary access. Change my beneficiaries. I want an official record of the forged application filed with your compliance department today. Joan met my eyes with the steady calm of a woman who had seen this before. We'll take care of you, she said. I signed new documents for 40 minutes. My hand did not shake once. When I walked out of the bank into the Sunday morning air, there was a small wind off the river, and it pressed against my face like something trying to get my attention. I let it. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and just breathed. The first text from Grant came at 11:47 that morning. I was home, watering the potted plants on the back porch. The mortgage payment didn't process. Is there an issue with the account? I set my phone face down on the porch railing and kept watering. By 1 o'clock, the texts had multiplied. My daughter now, "Mom, something's wrong with the transfer. Can you call me?" Then, "Mom, I really need you to look at this." Then, "We have bills due this week." By 3, Grant again. "I don't know what's happening, but this is not okay. You need to handle this. You need to handle this." I put on a jacket and walked to the end of the street and back. The neighborhood was quiet, Sunday afternoon quiet. A few kids on bikes, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. I stopped to talk with my neighbor Carl, a 70-year-old retired plumber who had lived next door since before Robert died, who always waved, who once shoveled my walk without being asked during the ice storm of 2019. "Peaceful out today," he said. "It is," I said, and I meant it. By evening, the calls had started. My daughter, 6 times. Grant, 4. I let them all go to voicemail. I made myself a bowl of soup and watched the news and went to bed at 9:30, which is earlier than I usually sleep. I slept soundly, which surprised me, but I suppose the body knows when a decision is finally real. Grant arrived the next morning without calling first. I heard his car in the driveway, and I was already at the kitchen table with my coffee when the knock came. Hard. 3 times. I opened the door. He was in his work clothes, but he had driven over during what should have been his office hours, which told me everything about how badly the morning had already gone for him. "What did you do?" he said. "Come inside," I said. "Don't stand in the doorway." He came in but didn't sit. He moved around my kitchen the way men do when they're too agitated to hold still, hands at his sides, jaw working. The mortgage payment bounced. Connor's school sent an overdue notice. The cars are flagging. Lauren is beside herself. He stopped moving and looked at me. "What is this? What are you doing?" I set my coffee mug down. "I'm doing what you told me to do," I said. He blinked. "I never told you to do anything. You told my daughter that I wasn't the image you were going for. You told my 8-year-old grandson's birthday party was not the appropriate place for me." I kept my voice even. I had used this voice in emergency rooms. I had used it when I had to tell families things no one wanted to hear. I took you at your word. I am no longer financially supporting a household where I am not welcome. He stared at me for a moment. I could see him recalibrating. The anger was still there, but underneath it, something else had started to surface. Something that looked almost like fear. "You can't just stop without warning. We depend on those transfers." "I know you do," I said. That was always the problem. I picked up the folder from the counter and placed it on the table between us. He looked at it, but didn't reach for it. 76 payments, I said. 6 years. $247,000. Your cars, your mortgage, your son's school, your pool, your vacations. I paid for a vacation to Hilton Head that I was not invited to attend. I paid for a school where I have never once been introduced as Connor's grandmother. I watched his face. "And you told me I was not the image you were going for. You're misrepresenting." "Grant," I said very quietly, I know about the loan application. The color left his face so quickly it was like watching something drain. The bank flagged it, I said. A cosigner application for $180,000. My name, my forged signature. I folded my hands on the table. The application has been reported to the bank's compliance department. I've been advised to file a report with the Knox County District Attorney's Office. I haven't done that yet. He didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice had dropped to something very different from what it had been when he arrived. I was going to tell you about it. It was going to be an investment. You would have benefited. You were going to tell me after you had already made me legally responsible for a debt I knew nothing about. He had no answer for that. You should go, I said, and you should speak with an attorney. He left without another word. I heard the BMW back out of the driveway, faster than necessary. I stood at the window and watched the street settle back into quiet. My daughter came that afternoon, without Grant. That alone told me something. She looked tired in a way that was different from the tiredness of a busy life. She sat at my kitchen table and wrapped her hands around the mug of tea I placed in front of her, and for a while she said nothing. I let the quiet sit between us. I had learned in 31 years of nursing that the most important things people need to say usually come when you stop filling the silence. I didn't know about the loan, she finally said. I believe you, I said. She looked up. I believe that you didn't know, I said. That's different from it not having happened. Her eyes filled, and I watched her fight it down the way she had fought tears since she was a small girl, pressing her lips together and blinking fast. She had always been like that, too proud to cry in front of anyone, even me. He said it was a formality, that he was just exploring options. I didn't know he was already submitting things with your name on them. Lauren, I waited until she looked at me. You have a choice to make, not about me, about what you are willing to accept. She nodded, very small. She didn't stay long. But when she left, she hugged me in the doorway, and it was a real hug, not the kind that's just movement. I stood at the door and watched her drive away and felt something ache in my chest that was not anger. It was the complicated grief of loving someone who is still in the process of becoming who they need to be. Tyler showed up on Wednesday evening. He was 20 years old, my daughter's son, from before she married Grant, and he was nothing like his stepfather and everything like himself. He was studying business at Pellissippi State, working 30 hours a week at a hardware store in West Knoxville, driving a 2009 Honda Civic with brakes that needed replacing and that he was saving up to fix himself. He knocked the way young people knock when they're not entirely sure of their welcome, a little tentative, a little hopeful. I opened the door and found him holding a pizza box and wearing his work polo, still smelling faintly of sawdust. Figured you might not feel like cooking, he said. I stood back to let him in. We sat at the kitchen table and ate, and he told me about his classes and his manager at the hardware store and a girl in his accounting class he thought he might ask to a movie. He talked easily, the way he always had with me, without performing. After a while, when the pizza was half gone, he set down his slice and looked at me with a seriousness that didn't belong to small talk. I went by the house Sunday, he said, to pick up my old baseball gear from the garage. Mom wasn't home, but I had a key. He paused. Grant's desk was open. There was a file on top of it, a quitclaim deed draft. I went very still. Your name was on it, he said, and the Birchwood property, Robert's rental house. The small property on Birchwood Lane that we had bought in the early years of our marriage, that had been rented steadily for 20 years, that generated the monthly income I lived on in retirement. The property I had always intended to leave to my grandchildren. He had a notary request form clipped to it, Tyler continued, and a letter from a title company. Grandma, he was trying to get you to sign it over. I set down my own slice of pizza. Did you take it? I asked. He reached into the front pocket of his work polo and produced his phone. He had photographed every page. We sat together at my kitchen table, going through the images, one by one. The quitclaim deed, the notary form, a letter to a property investment firm I had never heard of, with Grant's signature at the bottom, describing the Birchwood property as an asset that would be transferred in the coming weeks. He had been planning to take my rental house. The income from that property was the difference between a comfortable retirement and a precarious one, and he had been planning to take it while I was still busy funding his cars and his pool and his son's school blazer. I looked at my grandson across the table. He was watching me with a steadiness that reminded me of his grandfather, that particular quality of being willing to look at something hard without turning away. Thank you for bringing this to me, I said. I love you, Grandma, he said. It was simple and direct, the way young men sometimes say things they have thought carefully before speaking. I don't want anyone to hurt you. I squeezed his hand. They didn't succeed, I said. The next morning, I called Miss Ridley, an elder law attorney, whose card I had kept in my address book since Robert's illness. I had met her through the hospital's social work department, and I had always meant to make an appointment. The time had clearly come. I met with her for 2 hours. I brought the folder, and I brought Tyler's photographs. She was thorough and unhurried, and at the end of our meeting she said, quietly and without drama, that what my son-in-law had attempted was serious, and that I had more than enough documentation to protect myself fully and to cooperate with any investigation the authorities chose to pursue. I authorized her to file a report with the Knox County DA's office regarding the forged loan application. I authorized a title lock on the Birchwood property. I updated my will and restructured every account. When I walked out of her office into the gray November afternoon, I felt for the first time in several weeks that the ground under my feet was genuinely solid. The weeks that followed were quiet in my house and less quiet in my daughter's. Carl from next door mentioned on one of our porch conversations that he had seen the BMW being towed from the Maple Crest Drive driveway early one morning. A woman at my church told me gently that she had heard my daughter was looking at apartments. I did not confirm or deny anything. It was not my story to tell. Connor called me on a Saturday afternoon. His voice was small and careful, the way children's voices get when the adults around them are not steady. He asked if I would make the German chocolate cake for Thanksgiving. I told him yes, absolutely yes, and that I would save the biggest slice for him. He said, okay. Then, he said, he missed me. Then he hung up before I could figure out what to say back, which was probably a mercy, because I was going to cry, and it was better that he didn't hear that. My daughter and I spoke on the phone twice that week. Careful conversations, like walking across ice you haven't tested yet. She told me Grant had moved out. She said it quietly, without drama, the way she said hard things when she had already done her grieving before the conversation. She told me she had retained her own attorney. She did not ask me to feel sorry for her, which I appreciated. I told her I loved her. I told her she could call me whenever she needed. I told her Connor could come stay with me on weekends when she needed time for herself. She said thank you twice. Tyler came for dinner every Wednesday. He always brought something. Pizza one week, sandwiches the next. Once a very lopsided apple pie he had attempted himself, which we ate with great enthusiasm and no criticism. He told me in early December that he had spoken with an academic advisor about transferring to the University of Tennessee for his junior year. He had applied for a scholarship. He was genuinely excited about it, forward-looking in the way that belongs to young people who have decided to build something real on their own. I told him his grandfather would have been proud. I meant it absolutely. One Saturday morning, I drove to the flooring place on Alcoa Highway and ordered new linoleum for the kitchen. A warm terracotta color, something I had seen in a magazine years ago and liked and never done anything about. The installer came on a Thursday, and that evening I stood in my kitchen and looked at the floor and felt something uncurl in my chest that had been wound tight for longer than I could exactly say. I bought myself a new sweater, too. Cashmere, deep burgundy, the kind of thing I would have put back on the rack for years. I wore it to church the following Sunday, and someone told me the color suited me. I said thank you, and I meant that too. I booked a long weekend in Gatlinburg in January. A mountain cabin with a fireplace and a porch overlooking the valley. Robert and I had always said we would go. The timing was never right, and then it was never right for 30 years, and then he was gone, and then, for 7 more years, I had been so busy sustaining everyone else's life that I simply stopped imagining my own. I would go, in January. I would sit on that porch and drink my morning coffee in the cold and look at those mountains and think whatever thoughts came to me without wondering whether they were useful to anyone else. On an evening in mid-December, I was in the kitchen making Robert a peach cobbler from his mother's recipe, the one that uses canned peaches, because he always said fresh ones made you arrogant about the result. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and brown sugar. The new floor was warm under my socks. The faucet I had finally had repaired ran silent and clean. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Tyler. Got a 91 on my business law midterm. Thought you'd want to know. I typed back, your grandfather would have framed that grade on the wall. He sent a laughing emoji. Then, see you Wednesday. I'll bring the pie. I'm getting better at it. I set the phone down and went back to the cobbler. The peaches were bubbling at the edges, the topping golden and beginning to crack the way it does when it's almost ready. I turned on the oven light and watched it for a moment, the way you do when something is happening that you want to pay attention to. I thought about the folder I used to keep in the spare bedroom closet, the one I had carried into Joan's office and laid out page by page as an accounting of 6 years of my life. I had shredded it the week before, not with ceremony, just because it was done, and done things don't need to be kept. I thought about my daughter and the careful conversations we were slowly learning to have, honestly, without pretending the last 6 years had been anything other than what they were. I thought about Connor asking me for the German chocolate cake, his voice small and hopeful and 8 years old, already braver than he should have to be. I thought about Tyler and his lopsided pie and his scholarship application and the way he showed up every Wednesday like it was simply where he was supposed to be. I thought about Robert and what he would have said. He was not a man of many words, but the ones he chose were always right. He would have said, "You were never obligated to make their life easier than your own." The cobbler was ready. I lifted it from the oven and set it on the counter to cool. I got a plate and a fork and cut myself the first piece while it was still warm, the peaches soft and spiced, the crust giving cleanly under the fork. I sat down at my kitchen table, on my new floor, in my burgundy sweater, in the quiet house that was mine alone and mine completely, and I ate. Some lessons take a long time to learn. This one cost me more than it should have, in dollars and in years, and in the particular loneliness of being needed without being wanted. But I had learned it, finally and fully, sitting in a warm kitchen in Tennessee in December, with the taste of something sweet on my tongue, and not a single payment left to make that wasn't my own.